He grabbed her wrist before she could reach her car door. Not a gentle touch, not a hesitation, a grip. The kind that said, "I own this," the kind that had left bruises she'd learned to cover with long sleeves and careful smiles. Lena Voss felt the pressure of his fingers, and something cold flooded through her chest, the same cold she thought she'd buried under 2 years of therapy and new locks and a different zip code. "You thought moving across town meant something?" Ethan Walsh said it quietly, which was always worse than shouting. His voice was the temperature of concrete in January. "You thought I'd just... What? Forget you exist?" The parking lot was half lit. A Tuesday evening. Families pushing carts. A teenager on his phone. An older woman loading bags into her trunk 40 feet away. The ordinary world, completely indifferent. Ethan leaned close enough that she could smell the same cologne he'd worn the night he told her she was nothing. "No one will save you, Lena. Nobody is coming. You understand that? You are alone in this." She was not alone. She just didn't know it yet. Before we go any further, if you've ever watched someone stand in a parking lot and feel completely invisible while someone else took up all the air, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us, because what happens next in this story will remind you that sometimes the most unexpected people are already watching. Drop a comment and tell us what city or country you're watching from tonight. We love knowing who's out there with us. Now, let's get back to Lena. 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. That was how long it had been since Lena Voss signed the divorce papers. She knew the number not because she was counting down. She'd told herself 100 times she was done counting, but because her therapist, Dr. Marion Cole, had asked her to mark the date in her journal as a milestone. A before and after, Dr. Cole had called it. The day your life split into 2 timelines. Lena had written it down. She'd also eaten half a sleeve of crackers and cried in her bathroom for 40 minutes afterward, which she had not put in the journal. She was 34 years old. She taught 2nd grade at Clover Lane Elementary School in the Elmwood neighborhood of Cincinnati. She had 22 students whose names she knew by heart, whose handwriting she could identify without looking at the name at the top of the page, whose favorite colors and lunch habits and small anxieties she held in her head the way some people hold song lyrics. She was, by every external measure, a woman who had moved on. She'd changed apartments, changed her phone number, switched grocery stores twice, though the second switch had been inconvenient because the closer store had a better produce section, and she'd eventually decided that she would not rearrange her life around his shadow anymore. That decision had brought her back to the Creston Market on Vine Street, which had the good tomatoes and a parking lot that was usually crowded enough to feel safe. Usually. The problem with rebuilding a life after someone has spent years dismantling it is that the work is invisible. Nobody sees you relearning how to trust your own opinions, how to order exactly what you want at a restaurant, how to hear a sharp voice behind you in the hallway and not flinch. Nobody gives you a certificate. Nobody notices the mornings when getting out of bed feels like climbing out of something heavy, or the way you still rehearse conversations in the shower, arguments you've already won but your nervous system hasn't gotten the memo. From the outside, Lena Voss looked like a woman who had healed. She laughed at her students' jokes. She wore her dark hair down now, which she hadn't done during the marriage because Ethan had opinions about how she presented herself in public. She'd bought herself a small collection of earrings she actually liked. She made dinner on weeknights and called her mother on Sundays. And twice she'd let a colleague set her up on dates that were perfectly fine and completely forgettable. From the inside, she was still flinching at certain tones of voice. She was still checking the rearview mirror more than necessary. She was still, on some level, waiting. On the evening, everything changed. She had been carrying 2 canvas bags of groceries, tomatoes, yes, and a rotisserie chicken, and the specific brand of green tea Dr. Cole had mentioned offhandedly once that was apparently good for something. When she heard footsteps behind her that matched her pace, she told herself it was nothing. She pressed the button to unlock her car. "Lena." The sound of her own name in his mouth was like a key in a lock she'd tried to destroy. She turned slowly, because not turning felt more dangerous. And there he was. Ethan Walsh, in a gray jacket she didn't recognize, looking exactly like the man she'd married and nothing like the monster she sometimes had to remind herself he actually was. That was the cruelest trick of memory. Abusers rarely look like what they are. They look like someone you once believed in. "Ethan." She kept her voice flat. She'd practiced this. Dr. Cole called it the gray rock method. Become uninteresting, unresponsive, give nothing. I'm not going to talk to you. That's fine. I'll talk. He stepped closer. She stepped back and felt her hip hit the car. You've been ignoring my calls. Because I blocked your number. You blocked 3 numbers. I counted. He said it like it was a joke. She felt her stomach tighten. You know, I ran into your friend Claire last month. She says you're doing great, teaching, dating, maybe. He tilted his head, and she recognized that expression, the one that looked like curiosity and was actually something else entirely. I thought it was interesting that you'd tell Claire things you never bothered to tell me. We're divorced, Ethan. I don't tell you anything anymore. We were married for 4 years. His voice stayed quiet. That was always the thing. He never raised it in public. He was very careful about what witnesses heard. 4 years, and you left like I was nothing. Took your half of the savings, took your mother's jewelry, and just, he snapped his fingers, vanished. You think that's something you just get to do? Yes, she said. That's exactly what I think. Something shifted in his face, just slightly. A tightening around the jaw, a flicker in the eyes, the things she'd learned to watch for before the really bad moments. She gripped her grocery bags and tried to calculate the distance between herself and the car door. You look scared, he said. I'm not scared of you. You're white-knuckling those bags. She made herself loosen her hands. He noticed. He always noticed. I want you to hear me clearly, Ethan said. He moved half a step closer, close enough now that she was aware of his height, the way he'd always used it without touching her. I've been patient. I gave you your space. I gave you your little apartment, your little teacher life. But there are some things we need to discuss, financially, legally, things you walked away from. My attorney handles anything legal. You have her number. Your attorney. He almost smiled. Right. Lena Voss, mid-size firm, offices on 4th Street. I know a lot about Elena Vasquez's professional life, Lena. It would be unfortunate if certain questions came up about her handling of certain cases. There it was. The escalation she'd been waiting for. She had learned slowly and at great cost to recognize his patterns. He always started soft, and then he found the thing adjacent to you that he could threaten. Her friends. Her colleagues. Once, memorably, her mother's landlord. I'm going to get in my car now, she said. He put his hand on the door handle before she could. Not threatening, technically, just in the way. That was another thing he was good at, being technically, deniably, completely in the way. You haven't heard what I'm asking for. I don't need to. She looked at him directly because she'd learned that looking away made everything worse. Ethan, move your hand. No one is going to help you out here, he said, and the quiet in his voice shifted into something she recognized at a cellular level. The real voice. The one that had said, you're lucky I'm the only one who'll ever love someone like you, and you're not as smart as you think you are, and I don't know why you make me do this. You understand that? No one is watching. Nobody cares. No one will save you. The words hit her the way they always had. Not loud, not violent, but precise. He'd always known which words found the cracks. She felt the tears starting at the corners of her eyes, and was furious at herself for it. Not now. Not here. Not in front of him. Let her go. The voice came from behind Ethan and to the left, and it was completely calm, which was somehow more disorienting than if it had been loud. Ethan turned, Lena turned, and standing perhaps 10 feet away, with a paper bag of groceries in one hand and absolutely no urgency in his posture whatsoever, was a man she had never seen before. He was somewhere in his early 40s, dark-haired and wearing a coat that probably cost more than Lena's monthly rent. But it wasn't the coat that stopped her. It was the expression on his face, which was not anger, not heroism, not the performed concern of a bystander who wants credit for getting involved. It was something quieter than all of those things, something that looked almost like recognition, like he had seen this before, like he knew exactly what was happening. This doesn't involve you, Ethan said. Your hand is on her door. The man set his grocery bag on the roof of a nearby car with a deliberateness that felt almost formal. Move it. I suggest you walk away and mind your business. I'm going to suggest you do the same thing. He glanced briefly at Lena, not to assess her, not to check if she was impressed, but simply to confirm she was okay. Then his eyes returned to Ethan. This is the only time I'm going to say it. There was a pause. Lena's heart was doing something uncomfortable and rapid. She watched Ethan weigh the situation, watched his jaw work, watched him decide, but correctly, that something about this particular stranger was not worth testing. She didn't know why she thought that. She just did. Ethan removed his hand from the door. We're not done, he said to Lena. We've been done for 2 years, she told him. Her voice was steadier than she expected. He walked away. She watched him go. She kept watching until she saw his car pull out of the lot. She needed to see it leave. She needed to be certain. And then she let out a breath that had apparently been waiting since before she turned around. Are you all right? She turned. The man with the expensive coat had retrieved his grocery bag and was standing a respectful distance away, not hovering, not waiting for gratitude. He looked, she thought, like someone who had said what he said because it needed to be said, and not for any other reason. I'm fine, she said automatically. He nodded, didn't press it. Thank you, she added. You don't need to thank me. I know I don't need to. I'm choosing to. She surprised herself slightly. That was a thing Dr. Cole had taught her. The difference between what you owe someone and what you choose to give them. He does that, shows up. She stopped. She didn't know this person. I'm sorry. You don't need to hear my situation. You don't need to apologize either. She looked at him properly then. There was something in his face that she couldn't immediately name. Not softness exactly, but something that didn't have the quality of performance. He wasn't arranging himself for her benefit. He was just standing there, a man in a parking lot who had said 2 sentences and meant them. Marco Veyron, he said. He didn't extend a hand. He seemed to read that she might not want to be touched right now, but his voice had the same steadiness it had held the entire time. Lena Voss, do you have somewhere to be right now? Somewhere safe? She almost said I'm fine again, and then she stopped. Yes, my apartment. It's 20 minutes from here. Would it be better to sit somewhere public for a few minutes first? Coffee, maybe. He said it without any particular emphasis. Sometimes it helps to be somewhere with people before getting in a car alone. She opened her mouth to decline and then realized, with some annoyance at herself, that her hands were shaking slightly. She'd been holding herself together so carefully for the last 5 minutes that she hadn't noticed the adrenaline. She noticed it now. There's a diner across the street, she said. I know the place. The diner was called Patty's, and it had been on the corner of Vine and Creston for what looked like 40 years. The kind of place with laminate tabletops and a pie case, and exactly one server who seemed to be managing the whole floor by herself with the efficiency of someone who had stopped being impressed by anything. Lena chose a booth near the window because she wanted to see the parking lot, and she felt a small embarrassment about that, and then she let the embarrassment go. She ordered chamomile tea. Marco ordered black coffee and said please, which for some reason she noticed. They sat without speaking for a moment. The server refilled someone's water glass nearby. A couple argued quietly about something at a corner table. The sounds of a regular Tuesday. You said his name was Ethan, Marco said eventually. My ex-husband. She wrapped both hands around her mug, which had arrived with remarkable speed. We've been divorced for over 2 years. She thought about how to frame it, and then decided she was too tired to frame it carefully. He wasn't a good husband, and he's not a good ex-husband either. Marco nodded. He didn't say I'm sorry, or that's terrible, or any of the things people said when they were really just trying to fill the space. He just nodded, like what she had said was information he was receiving and taking seriously. She found that unexpectedly settling. Does he do that regularly? Show up places? This is the first time at the Creston Market. He tried my workplace last spring, but the principal stopped that quickly. She paused. It's not constant. He goes quiet for months and then he resurfaces. It's almost worse when he's quiet. When he's quiet, I start wondering if it's over, and then I let myself relax, and then... She shrugged with one shoulder. He resets your sense of safety each time, Marco said. She looked at him. Yes, exactly. I'm familiar with that tactic. She wasn't sure how to take that. His tone suggested he wasn't speaking from the same position she was, not as a victim of it, but as someone who had studied it from some other angle. She didn't ask. They'd known each other for approximately 30 minutes. The things he said, she started, and then she changed direction slightly. The last thing he said before you came over. About no one coming. He said it before. He says it when he wants me to feel most... She searched for the word and settled on the accurate one. Abandoned. He's always known that was the right word to use. And was he right? When he said it before? In the moment? She thought about it honestly. Sometimes. Not always. I called the police twice. Once they came quickly, and once it took 40 minutes, but both times he'd already left. She turned her mug in a slow circle. He's very good at not leaving evidence. He never touches me in front of witnesses. He speaks quietly enough that no one else can hear what he actually says. He just... She made a small, helpless gesture. Stands there, which is not technically illegal. No, Marco said. It's not technically illegal. He said it in a way that suggested he found the gap between technically illegal and genuinely wrong as interesting as she did. What kind of businessman? She asked, which was a pivot but felt like a reasonable one. He looked up from his coffee. Sorry? You said Marco Veyron. I'm asking what kind of business. It's easier than sitting here thinking about Ethan. Something moved across his face that might have been the beginning of a smile. Real estate, primarily. Some investments in construction and private transport. That's a careful answer. It's an accurate one. She looked at him over the rim of her mug. In another life, in a version of herself that hadn't spent 4 years having her judgment systematically dismantled and then 2 years putting it back together piece by piece, she might have said something easier here, something polite and concluding. But she'd been rebuilding herself deliberately, and one of the things she'd rebuilt was this. She didn't feel obligated to ask less than she actually wanted to know. What made you come over? In the parking lot. Most people don't. I know. He said it simply. Most people decide it's not their situation. But you decided differently. He was quiet for a moment. I heard what he said. The last part. He didn't elaborate on which part. He didn't need to. There are certain things a person can hear and then continue with their evening, and there are things a person hears and finds they can't. She looked at him. Thank you, she said again, meaning it differently this time. Not for the intervention itself, but for the explanation, for treating her like someone capable of understanding a real answer. You said that already. I know. I'm choosing to say it again. This time he did smile, briefly, and it changed his face in a way she hadn't expected. He looked imposing in the parking lot. He looked, for just a moment, like someone who found things genuinely funny when they were funny. She drove home 20 minutes later. The shaking in her hands had stopped. She parked in her building's garage, went up to her apartment on the 4th floor, set the tomatoes on the counter, and stood in her kitchen for a full minute without moving. Then she called Dr. Cole's answering service and left a message asking if there was a cancellation appointment available this week. She described the parking lot in 2 sentences. She said she was okay, but she wanted to talk. Then she made herself dinner, the chicken, a salad, the green tea she'd bought for reasons she now remembered, and sat at her small table and looked out at the city lights and thought about a man who had heard something and decided he couldn't continue with his evening. She thought about Ethan's face when he walked away. He'd been surprised, she realized. Not frightened, exactly. She didn't know what frightened Ethan Walsh, and she suspected nothing ordinary did. But surprised. Like the calculus of the situation had produced a result he wasn't expecting. She wondered who Marco Veyron was, in the version of the world that existed outside a Creston Market parking lot on a Tuesday night. She wondered what he knew about tactics and safety and the specific mechanics of how a person deploys silence as a weapon. She pushed the wondering away. She'd been through enough to know that wondering about powerful men was not her safest instinct. But as she cleared the table and washed her mug and checked the locks on her windows, something she still did every night, quietly and without drama, the way other people checked that the stove was off, she found herself thinking less about Ethan than she had in months. Not because she felt rescued. She'd been through too much to confuse someone else's presence with her own safety. But because, for the first time in a long time, someone had heard exactly what was happening and had refused to look away. The following day, 22 7-year-olds entered Lena's classroom with the velocity and chaos of a small indoor weather system, and for several hours she was completely and usefully absorbed in the ordinary demands of her work. Marcus drew a rocket that he insisted was actually a submarine. Twin sisters Delia and Sasha both forgot their permission slips for the Thursday field trip and were very confident that this was not their fault. A boy named Oliver announced during reading time that he didn't like this book. And then, when Lena asked what kind of book he would like, described the plot of something that would have been a genuinely excellent novel if he'd been the one to write it. She loved this work in the way that some people love breathing, not as something she thought about constantly, but as something that confirmed on a cellular level that she was in the right place. Between lunch and the afternoon reading block, she found herself thinking about Ethan's attorney threat, about Lena Voss, who had been professional and rigorous and extremely clear with Lena about what the divorce settlement could and could not do. What Ethan had said in the parking lot, certain questions about her handling of certain cases, was almost certainly nothing. A bluff, an intimidation attempt dressed in legal language. Almost certainly. She called Elena's office from the teacher's lounge during her prep period and left a message explaining that Ethan Walsh had approached her in public and mentioned Elena by name. She kept her voice neutral. She described what he'd said precisely. She said she wasn't sure if it was actionable, but wanted Elena's office to have a record. Then she went back to her classroom and taught Oliver's group how to find the main idea of a paragraph, and tried to explain to Marcus that submarines didn't have wings. It was fine. She was fine. It wasn't until she was walking to her car in the school parking lot, a different parking lot, a familiar one, surrounded by colleagues and parents and the general controlled chaos of afternoon pickup, that she noticed the black car idling across the street. She stopped. It wasn't Ethan's car. Different make, different color, different plates from what she remembered. It was just a car parked across from a school parking lot, which was not inherently remarkable. But it stayed there for the 15 minutes it took her to load her bag and say goodbye to 3 other teachers and pull out of the lot. And when she looked in her rearview mirror as she turned onto Fairfield Avenue, it didn't follow her. She told herself that meant nothing. It had probably been nothing. She drove home 4 miles under the speed limit, checked all her locks twice, and didn't sleep well. Marco Veyron's name, she found the next morning over coffee, existed publicly in a way that felt slightly too curated. 3 hits in the first page of search results. A small mention in a Cincinnati Business Journal article about development along the river, a very brief appearance in a regional philanthropy piece about a children's arts foundation, and a LinkedIn profile so spare it contained almost no information other than confirming that he existed and worked in real estate. No photos. No social media. 1 photograph in the Business Journal article, partially obscured. She had, she reflected, expected either much more or much less. A person so deliberately minimal online was either deeply private or deeply careful about what public records showed. And she had spent 4 years with a man who was careful about things, and she was experienced enough to know those 2 categories were not the same. She closed her laptop. She was not going to look up a man she'd met once in a parking lot. She was not going to think about him. She had enough to manage. She taught her class. She met with a parent about a reading assessment. She stayed late to decorate the classroom bulletin board because the current display of autumn leaves had been up since September, and it was now mid-November, and her students deserved better. She was reaching for a staple remover on the top shelf of her supply cabinet when she heard the buzzer for the main office from down the hall, and then the particular sound of Principal Harriet Odom's voice, firm, calm, and absolutely unyielding, saying, "I'm afraid, Mr. Walsh, as we've discussed, you are not authorized to be on school property." The staple remover fell. Lena picked it up. She stood very still for a moment. Then she walked to the door of her classroom and stood in the frame, not quite visible from the front entrance, and listened. Ethan's voice, muffled but recognizable. "I simply wanted to speak with one of your teachers. It's a personal matter." "Harriet, I understand, and I'm telling you that personal matters are handled through the office, with prior arrangement, and only with the individual's consent. Would you like to leave contact information?" Ethan, "She has my contact information." Harriet, "Then I'd suggest reaching out that way. I'm going to ask you to have a good evening now, Mr. Walsh." A pause. And then, faintly, the sound of the front door. Lena let out the breath she'd been holding. She walked back to her bulletin board and stapled a paper star to it with perhaps slightly more force than was strictly necessary. 2 days. He'd waited 2 days. She pulled her phone from her pocket and wrote a careful text to Lena Voss's direct number. "He came to my school again tonight. Principal turned him away. I wanted to document it." Then she added, Is there anything we can do legally? Anything more than last time? Then she put her phone away and finished her bulletin board, because the bulletin board was within her control, and Ethan Walsh's behavior was not. And Dr. Cole had spent 6 months helping her understand the radical importance of acting within the domain of what she could actually affect. She drove home. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table and tried not to wonder how long this wave would last before he went quiet again, and what it would mean if this time he didn't. Her phone buzzed. Elena, responding quickly for 8 in the evening. Documenting everything is exactly right. Keep a log. Date, time, location, what was said. I'm going to review what we have. Call me Thursday if you're available. She typed back, Thursday works. Thank you. Then a second message from a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Voss. This is Marco Veyron. I apologize for the unsolicited contact. I got your name from a mutual acquaintance at Creston Market. The store manager, Paulette, who knows you. I understand if you'd prefer I not reach out. I simply wanted to check that you arrived home safely the other night. You can ignore this. MV. She stared at it for a long time. Then she typed, The store manager told you my name? The response came within 2 minutes. She confirmed you were a regular and that you'd seemed distressed when you left. I didn't ask for more than that. I apologize if this feels like an overreach. She thought about Ethan at her school. She thought about the black car, which had probably been nothing. She thought about the feeling of someone stepping forward in a parking lot and meaning it. She typed, It's okay. I'm home. Thank you for checking. She put the phone on the table and looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up and added, He came to my school again today. She didn't know why she sent that. She didn't know what she expected him to do with it. But she sent it, and her finger didn't hesitate on the button, and that, she thought, was something. His response came after several minutes. I see. I'm glad the principal handled it. Are you safe tonight? Yes, she typed. I think so. Good. And then, after a pause that she could somehow feel even through the medium of a text message, if that changes, you can call this number. She sat with that for a while. Outside her window, Cincinnati went on with its evening. The sound of traffic, a siren somewhere distant, the neighbor's television murmuring through the wall. The ordinary world, continuing without drama. Inside her apartment, a woman who had spent 2 years learning to trust herself again looked at a stranger's number on her phone screen and thought about what it meant that someone had sought out the information to ask if she was okay. She thought about the difference between men who sought out information to use it as leverage and men who sought it out for reasons that might, cautiously, possibly, be different than that. She didn't know yet which kind Marco Veyron was. But she saved the number. She saved the number on a Wednesday night. By Friday morning, she had not used it. She told herself this was sensible. She told herself this was the healthy, rational, therapeutically appropriate response to the situation. Because Dr. Cole had been very clear, across 14 months of sessions, that Lena's pattern was to move toward people who offered certainty, and that certainty offered too quickly was not the same thing as safety. She had learned this the hard way. She had a divorce decree and 2 years of insomnia as evidence. So she did not call the number. She went to work. She taught her class. She documented Ethan's school visit in a Word document that she was maintaining at Elena Vasquez's instruction. Date, time, what happened, witnesses. It was 3 entries long now, which was 3 entries more than she'd had 2 weeks ago. And Elena had said, quietly but with the particular precision of a woman who chose her words like surgical instruments, that a pattern was beginning to establish itself. Patterns are what courts respond to, Elena had told her on Thursday. 1 incident is personal. 3 incidents with witnesses is a case. Lena had written that down too. Friday ended. She drove home. She made soup from the leftover chicken and stood at her counter eating it because she hadn't bothered to sit, and she was midway through a bowl of something that was technically nutritious and completely joyless when her phone rang. Not the unknown number, but her mother, Carol Voss, calling from her condo in Columbus, as she did every Friday evening at approximately 7:15 with the reliability of a tidal pattern. Tell me something good, her mother said, which was how she always started. My student Marcus finally accepted that submarines don't have wings. That is good. Her mother paused. And the other kind of good? Lena set down her spoon. Ethan showed up at Creston Market on Tuesday, and then at the school on Thursday. The silence on the other end lasted exactly long enough for Carol Voss to absorb the information and make the decision not to say the first three things that came to her mind. Her mother was not a woman who suppressed things easily, which made the effort visible. What did the principal do? Turned him away, same as before. And Elena? We're documenting, building a pattern. A pattern? Her mother's voice went flat in the way it did when she was holding something back with both hands. He shows up at your job and we're building a pattern. Mom, I know. You're handling it. You have Elena. You have Dr. Cole. I know. A breath. I just hate that you have to handle it at all. Yeah, Lena said. Me too. After she hung up, she stood at her counter for a while longer. The apartment was quiet in the way she'd trained herself to call peaceful rather than empty. She'd worked on that specifically. The difference between solitude and loneliness was mostly a story you told yourself, Dr. Cole said, and Lena had been practicing telling the better story for long enough that it usually worked. Tonight it was working less than usual. She picked up her phone. She looked at the saved contact. She'd put it in as MV because saving it as Marco Veyron felt like a statement she wasn't ready to make. She looked at it for approximately 45 seconds. Then she put the phone down and washed her bowl and went to bed. She slept, which was something. Saturday, she met her friend Claire Okafor for coffee at a place in Northside that Claire had been recommending for 3 months, and that was, Lena admitted, genuinely excellent. Claire was a pediatric nurse with opinions about everything and the energy of someone who ran on 4 hours of sleep and pure conviction, and she had been Lena's closest friend since before the marriage, which meant she had witnessed things Lena would have preferred no one witness, and had never once said, "I told you so," which was the real measure of a person. He was at Creston Market, Lena said, because Claire was going to hear it eventually, and hearing it from Lena was better than the alternative. Claire set down her cortado. When? Tuesday evening. What did he do? Lena told her. She kept it precise and factual, the way she'd learned to do. Not because the emotion wasn't there, but because she'd found that factual telling kept her in her body in a way that dramatic telling didn't. She told Claire about the parking lot and the words and the man who had stepped in, and she watched Claire's face move through anger and relief and something that landed, finally, in the territory of careful attention. Who is he? Claire said. The man. Marco Veyron. He's in real estate, apparently. He texted me after to check if I was okay. He found your number. Through Paulette at the store. She confirmed I was a regular. Claire turned her cup in a small circle on the table. Do you know anything else about him? Not really. He has a very thin online presence. That's interesting. I know. Are you going to pursue it? No, Lena said, which was the answer she'd been giving herself for 3 days, and which sat in her mouth this morning with slightly less conviction than it had on Wednesday night. He's a stranger who stepped in during a bad moment. That doesn't mean I owe him a relationship. I didn't say you owed him anything. Claire looked at her steadily. I asked if you were going to pursue it. Lena was quiet for a moment. He said I could call if something changed. And has something changed? Ethan came to my school on Thursday. Claire picked up her cortado and took a slow sip. I see. It's not that I want someone to fix it. I don't. I'm building a legal case. I have Elena. I have documentation. I have Lena. Claire's voice was gentle and exact. You don't have to argue for why you'd want to call someone who was decent to you in a parking lot. You're not on trial. Lena looked at the table. Outside the coffee shop window, a Saturday morning moved at its weekend pace. People with strollers, a man walking 2 dogs, the ordinary architecture of other people's untroubled mornings. I don't know what he is, she said finally. And I spent 4 years not seeing what Ethan was. That's fair? Claire set her cup down. That's also not the same thing as saying every person you meet has something to hide. I know. Do you? Lena didn't answer because the honest answer was mostly. Mostly she knew that. On the days when she felt most like herself, she knew it clearly. On the days when she felt most like the person who had spent years being told her judgment was wrong, she wasn't sure she trusted her instincts about anyone. She texted him Saturday afternoon, standing in her kitchen after the coffee with Claire, while a specific and inexplicable stubbornness worked its way up through her better judgment. There was a car outside my school the other day, different from his. I don't know if it was connected. I'm probably overreacting. She hit send and immediately felt foolish. His response came in 11 minutes. What did it look like? She described it. Make, approximate color, the fact that it had stayed for 15 minutes and then left without following her. Did you see the plates? Partial. Starts with K, I think. Ohio plates. A longer pause this time. 4 minutes. Was it there again? No. Just the one time. Okay. If it appears again, photograph it if you can do so safely. Don't go out of your way. She stared at the instructions. They were practical. They were not the instructions of someone who thought she was overreacting. They were also the instructions of someone who had thought about this kind of situation before, in a way that suggested familiarity beyond ordinary civilian concern. She typed, "You sound like you know something about surveillance." His response was immediate this time. "I know something about caution." She put the phone down. She picked it up again. "He's escalating. 2 incidents in 1 week after months of quiet." "Yes. My attorney says a pattern is what courts respond to. Your attorney is right." Then, after a beat, "How are you sleeping?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't expected it. She'd expected more practicality, more logistics, and instead she got that. The specific and unglamorous detail of sleep, which was the first thing fear took from you. "Not great," she typed honestly. "You?" "I don't sleep much in general." A pause. "I'm sorry this is happening to you." She didn't know what to do with that. She sat with it for a moment and then she typed back, "Thank you for checking in." "You didn't have to. I know I didn't." 3 days later, she came home from school to find a manila envelope tucked under her apartment door. She stood in the hallway and looked at it for a long moment before picking it up. No return address. Her name in print, not handwriting. She brought it inside, set it on the counter, and made herself take off her coat and wash her hands before opening it, because the routine of small, ordinary actions was the thing that kept panic from making decisions. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no letterhead, printed in the same clean font as the envelope. "You should have come back when I asked. This is the last time I use words." She read it twice. Then she took a photograph of it with her phone, envelope and letter, her hands visible in the frame to establish context, and sent it to Elena Vasquez's number with the message, "Just found this under my door. Time-stamped. I haven't touched it more than necessary." Elena called back within 3 minutes. "This is what we've been waiting for," Elena said, without any preamble. "Written threat, delivered to your home address. He's confirmed he knows where you live. This elevates everything. I can file for a restraining order on Monday morning with this plus the school incident. Lena, this is significant." "He knows where I live," Lena said. "Yes, which is terrifying and also legally useful. Do you have somewhere else you can stay for a few days while I get the paperwork in motion?" She thought about her mother in Columbus. She thought about Claire's spare bedroom. She thought about the particular indignity of being driven out of her own apartment by a piece of paper slipped under a door. "I'll figure it out. Call me if anything else happens tonight. Don't be alone if you can avoid it." After she hung up, Lena stood in her kitchen with her coat back on, because she hadn't taken it off again after picking up the envelope, and stared at the counter. Then she called the MV number. He answered on the second ring. "Lena, I got a letter under my door." She told him what it said. She kept her voice flat, because flat was the only option right now. "My attorney is filing for a restraining order Monday." A silence. Not the kind that meant he wasn't listening, the kind that meant he was. "Are you in your apartment now?" "Yes." "Is the door locked?" "Yes." "Chain too?" She walked to the door and slid the chain. "Now it is." "Good." His voice was even, and she held on to the evenness of it, the way you hold a railing in the dark. "You said your attorney told you not to be alone. Is there somewhere you can go?" "My friend Claire or my mother in Columbus." "Which is closer?" "Claire, 20 minutes. "Can you call her now?" "Yes." She paused. "I didn't call you so you could tell me to call Claire." "I know you didn't." She let out a long breath. "I called because I needed to tell someone who would understand what this actually means. My mother will be frightened. Claire will be angry. You—" She stopped. "You can say it." "You don't flinch," she said. "You just process it and respond to what's actually useful." "Is that what you needed?" "Right now? Yes." "Okay." His voice was quiet. Then here's what's actually useful. The letter is evidence. Your attorney is right that it's significant. A restraining order changes his legal exposure substantially. Any contact after that becomes criminal, not just civil. You go to Claire's tonight, let Elena do her work on Monday, and you keep documenting everything. A pause. And if anything happens between now and Monday, you call 911 first, and then you call me. What would you do? She asked. If I called you, what would you actually do? The pause that followed was about 2 seconds long, which felt, in the architecture of a tense phone call, like considerably more. I would make sure nothing happened to you, he said. That's all I'm going to tell you right now. She held the phone and thought about what that meant and decided, for tonight, she didn't need to know more than that. I'm going to call Claire, she said. Good. Marco. She said his name directly for the first time. Thank you. Go pack a bag, he said. Not dismissively, more like a man who understood that gratitude and action were both real, and right now action was what she needed to focus on. She went and packed a bag. Claire's apartment was warm and smelled like garlic, and the specific overachiever's chaos of a person who had 3 books open at once, and a corkboard above her desk that had not been curated so much as accumulated. Lena slept on the pullout and woke up at 2 in the morning and then again at 5. And both times she lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of a building that wasn't hers and tried to relearn the difference between unfamiliar and unsafe. By Monday morning, Elena had filed the paperwork. By Monday afternoon, a temporary restraining order was in process. Not yet served, not yet final, but in motion. Elena called Lena during her prep period to explain the timeline, which involved approximately 3 more days and Ethan being served with the paperwork, after which any contact within 200 yards would constitute a violation. 3 days, Lena said. 3 days. Keep documenting. Keep staying somewhere other than your apartment if you can. Lena stayed at Claire's through Wednesday. On Thursday morning, she went home, because her apartment was her home, and she had chain locks and she was choosing not to be permanently displaced from her own life. She checked every room when she arrived, which she did not tell anyone about because she knew it was the anxiety rather than a real threat. But she also knew that knowing something was anxiety-driven and being able to stop doing it were 2 different categories of experience. The restraining order was served Thursday afternoon. Elena texted her, confirmed served. Any contact now is a criminal matter. Lena read the text in her classroom after the students had gone home. She sat at her desk and read it twice, and then she put her phone in her drawer and sat very still for about 2 minutes. It should have felt like winning. In a narrow legal sense, it was. It felt like holding a piece of paper between herself and something that didn't particularly respect paper. The call came from Elena on Friday morning at 7:45, when Lena was at her kitchen table with coffee, and it started with 3 words that restructured the morning. He has photographs. Lena set down her mug. What? Ethan's attorney contacted me last night. They're claiming harassment on his part. I know. And as part of their counterfiling, they've submitted photographs. Of you, taken without your knowledge. Your apartment building entrance. The school parking lot. The diner on Vine Street. A pause. With you and an unknown man. Lena stared at her kitchen counter. He was watching me. Before the parking lot incident, he already had someone watching me. It looks that way, yes. The photographs are technically legal, public spaces, but the pattern they establish is useful for us in a different way than they intended. His attorney is arguing that you've already moved on, and therefore the distress claim is exaggerated. Elena's voice was precisely controlled in the way it got when she was managing her own anger. The photograph with the man is meant to suggest you're in a relationship and therefore not genuinely afraid. Lena thought about the diner, the Tuesday night, the chamomile tea, Marco sitting across from her with his careful, steady voice. He was a stranger, she said. He stopped Ethan from blocking my car door in the parking lot. I had coffee with him for 30 minutes. I believe you. It doesn't matter right now. What matters is his attorney is going to use these images to paint you as someone manufacturing distress. What do? We counterfile with everything we have and we establish the timeline precisely. I need the stranger's name and contact information because I may need him to confirm the nature of the interaction. The word stranger sat oddly now. He hadn't been a stranger for some time. His name is Marco Veyron, she said. A brief silence. Say that again. Marco Veyron. He's in real estate. Lena. Elena's voice had changed register slightly, in a way that lifted the small hairs on Lena's forearms. Are you certain of that name? Yes. Why? Another pause. I need to make some calls. Can you come to my office at noon? I have a class. Can you come at 4? Yes. Elena, what is it? Come at 4. I'll explain then. The call ended and Lena sat at her kitchen table with her coffee going cold and the morning light coming through the window at a low November angle and the very specific feeling of something shifting beneath what she thought she understood. Not falling, not yet, but moving. The ground moving. She texted Marco. My ex had someone photographing me before the parking lot. He has a photo of us at the diner. His response came back in under a minute, which told her he was already awake, possibly had been for some time. I expected something like this. She read the words twice. You expected it? Men like him document things to use later. I should have mentioned that possibility. My attorney reacted to your name, she typed. She knows who you are. The longest pause yet. Nearly 3 minutes, during which Lena stood up from the table and walked to her window and stood there looking at the street below and waiting. Yes, he wrote finally. She would. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. Are you going to tell me why? I'll tell you myself, he wrote back. Not over text. If you're willing to meet. She looked at her phone. She looked at the street. A woman walked a small dog in the pale morning. A delivery truck double parked. The city going about its ordinary business, uninformed and indifferent to the fact that a woman on the 4th floor was trying to decide how much she trusted the steadiness she felt around a man whose name apparently meant something significant to a very sharp attorney. Where? She typed. Your choice. Public. She named a coffee shop on Madison that she liked. Different from Patty's, different from the Northside place, somewhere new that didn't have any existing associations. She named 12:30 before her 4 o'clock with Elena. I'll be there, he wrote. She put down her phone and went to get ready for work, and she was almost at the bathroom when her phone buzzed one more time. Lena. Whatever Elena tells you at 4. Hear me out first. She stared at the message. The polite version of that sentence was, I'd like the chance to explain. The honest version, the version that told her something about what he was expecting Elena to say, was the thing you're about to find out is going to change how you see me. She typed back, that depends on what you tell me at 12:30. Then she went to get ready for school, and she taught her 22 students with her full attention, the way she always did, because they deserved her full attention, and because there was something grounding about a room full of 7-year-olds who needed nothing from her, except exactly what she knew how to give. At 12:25, she parked outside the coffee shop on Madison Avenue, and at 12:28 she walked in and found Marco Veyron already at a corner table, without a coat this time, in a dark shirt, with his hands folded on the table, and the expression of a man who had decided to stop managing his face. He looked, she thought, like someone who had decided to be honest. She sat down across from him. Tell me, she said. He looked at her directly. No preamble. My family built things in this city that were not legitimate. My father, his partners, and eventually me. The real estate is real. The construction is real. But the structure underneath it, he stopped for a fraction of a second. The word people use is organization. What it means in practice is that I grew up in a world where power was kept through fear, and I was very good at it for a very long time. The coffee shop hummed around them. Someone ordered something with oat milk. The barista called a name. Were, Lena said. You said were. Yes. That's a meaningful word to use. I know. He didn't look away. I've been building toward legitimate operations for 2 years. Some of my associates don't agree with the direction. The transition has not been uncomplicated. How uncomplicated? The kind where people who depended on the old structure see it changing and react badly. She held his gaze. The car outside my school. Something moved in his face. I don't know who was driving it. That's the honest answer. It could have been Ethan's people. It could have been someone from my world watching me make a choice they didn't like. He said it without flinching, and she understood then that this was what it looked like when someone didn't try to minimize the size of what they were saying. I should have told you that was a possibility when you mentioned it. Yes, she said. You should have. I know. The silence between them had weight now, a different weight than the diner. The diner had been the silence of two people who didn't know each other. This was the silence of two people who were learning something real and trying to decide what to do with it. You stepped in at that parking lot, she said. A Mafia boss stopped to help a stranger being harassed by her ex-husband. I heard what he said to you. His voice didn't change. And I made a choice. Why? Genuinely, you could have walked to your car. Yes. So why didn't you? He looked at the table for a moment, and it was the first time she'd seen him do that. Look away, look for words that weren't already assembled. When he looked back up, what was on his face was not performance. Because I've spent a long time being the person a room fears, and I watched a man use that kind of fear on someone who hadn't done anything to deserve it, and I found I didn't want to be the person who kept walking. She sat with that. She turned it over. She checked it for the particular hollow quality that lies had, the slight excess of neatness, the way a prepared answer fit too perfectly. It didn't have that quality. It had the rougher texture of something actually true. My attorney is going to tell me who you are at 4 o'clock, she said. Yes. And you wanted me to hear it from you first? Yes. Why does that matter? If the information is the same either way. He looked at her with something that was almost patience and almost urgency, two things she wouldn't have expected to coexist. Because who tells you a thing and why they tell you shapes how you receive it. Lena Vasquez is going to tell you because it's a legal risk and her job is to protect you from legal risks. I'm telling you because you deserve to know who you've been talking to. Lena looked at him across the table. Outside, a bus went past the window. Two women walked by in conversation, one of them laughing at something. The world, continuing. Marco, she said, if someone from your world had that car outside my school. She stopped. How much danger am I in that has nothing to do with Ethan? He didn't answer immediately. He didn't fill the space with reassurance. He let the question be the serious thing it was, and then he said, I don't know yet. I'm working on finding out, but I will not lie to you about the possibility that there is some. It was the most frightening, honest answer she'd ever been given, and it was the honest answer, and somewhere in the architecture of who she'd become over the last 2 years, she recognized that this, a man who told her the true size of a thing instead of the manageable size, was something she'd been missing for a very long time. She didn't feel safe. She didn't feel reassured. She felt like a woman sitting across from a complicated truth with her eyes open, which was, she understood, the only version of safety that had ever actually been available to her. I'm going to go to my 4 o'clock, she said. I'm going to hear what Elena says. I know. And then I'm going to decide what I do with all of this. That's fair. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She looked at him one more time. This man with his careful voice and his dangerous past and his 2-minute response time. And she said, if there is someone watching me because of you, I need to know the moment you find out, not after you've handled it. The moment. Yes, he said. She nodded once. She walked to the door. She pushed it open into the November afternoon and stood for a moment on the sidewalk. And her heart was doing something rapid and complicated, and the city was cold and bright and entirely indifferent to the fact that she had just learned something that should have made her walk away and couldn't seem to locate the part of herself that wanted to. She walked to her car. She drove toward Elena's office 3 hours early because she needed to move and she needed to think, and she needed the version of herself who had survived Ethan Walsh to weigh in on what surviving looked like now. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. She glanced at it at a red light. It was Ethan's number, the new one, the third one, the one she hadn't blocked yet because Elena had said to let the messages come in for documentation. I know who your new friend is. You really are something, Lena. You leave one dangerous man and walk straight into another one. Some people never learn. The light turned green. She set the phone face down on the seat and drove, and her hands on the wheel were completely steady, which surprised her. And she thought about what it meant that Ethan knew, and what it meant that knowing it was the card he chose to play. Because a man who wanted her frightened would play that card, and a man who was frightened himself would play it too. She arrived at Elena's office an hour and 50 minutes early and sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes before going in. The garage was dim and smelled like concrete and exhaust, and she sat in her car with the engine off and Ethan's text still face down on the passenger seat. and tried to locate the version of herself that made clear decisions. She knew the version existed. She'd built it deliberately, across 14 months of therapy and 2 years of solitary rebuilding, and it was not fragile. It had survived things that should have broken it, but right now it felt like a signal she was having trouble tuning into. Too much interference, too much noise. She picked up the phone. She read the text again. "I know who your new friend is. You really are something, Lena. You leave one dangerous man and walk straight into another one. Some people never learn." The thing about Ethan's cruelty was that it had always been most effective when it carried a grain of something true. Not truth exactly. He'd never been interested in truth. But the shape of truth, the silhouette of it, enough to make you doubt yourself. She had spent years learning to distinguish between the grain and the rest of the husk. The grain here was, Marco Veyron came from something dangerous. The rest of the husk was the implication that this made him the same as Ethan. That danger was danger, that all-powerful men were identical, that she had walked from one cage directly into another. She put the phone down. She got out of the car. Elena Vasquez's office was on the 14th floor of a building on 4th Street, and it had the particular aesthetic of a woman who had decided that competence was its own decoration. Clean lines, no clutter. One substantial plant by the window that looked like it had been alive for a long time and intended to keep going. Elena herself was 42, with reading glasses she forgot to take off when she wasn't reading, and a stillness that Lena had initially mistaken for coldness and had since understood was something more like controlled precision. She looked up when her assistant showed Lena in, and something in her face adjusted in a way that told Lena she had already been thinking about this. "You're early," Elena said. "I know. He texted me after I left the coffee shop." She handed Elena her phone across the desk. "New number, 3rd one." Elena read the text. Her expression didn't change in any dramatic way, but something behind her eyes went sharper. She set the phone down. "Sit." Lena sat. "I need to ask you something directly," Elena said, "and I need you to answer me the same way." "All right. How much contact have you had with Marco Veyron since the parking lot incident?" "Text messages, mostly. One in-person meeting today at a coffee shop on Madison. He told me himself, about his background, his family's organization, before you could." Elena sat back slightly. "He told you?" "Yes." "What specifically did he say?" Lena repeated it as precisely as she could. The real estate, the construction, the structure underneath it, the word organization, the transition toward legitimacy, the associates who disagreed. Elena listened without interrupting, which was something Lena had always appreciated about her. She did not perform listening, she actually did it. When Lena finished, Elena was quiet for a moment. She took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk. "How much do you know about the Veyron family's history in this city?" "Almost nothing. I barely found him online." "You wouldn't. They've been deliberate about visibility for 30 years. Elena looked at her steadily. "Marco Veyron's father, David Veyron, built a logistics and construction network in this region that was used for several decades to move things that were not construction materials. Money, primarily. Some commodities. The family was investigated twice by federal authorities. The second investigation was 9 years ago and resulted in 2 convictions that did not include David Veyron or his son." She paused. "Marco took primary control of the operation approximately 6 years ago, after his father's health declined. He has not been convicted of anything. He has been named in 3 civil suits, all settled confidentially. He said he's been transitioning to legitimate operations for 2 years. That is what his public filings suggest, yes." Elena's voice was careful in the way it got when she was navigating between what she knew and what she could say. "Lena, I believe you when you tell me he was decent to you in that parking lot. I believe you that he checked in and that he told you the truth this morning." She leaned forward slightly. "What I need you to understand is that a man like Marco Veyron does not become involved in a stranger's situation without reason. Even good impulses, in men who operate the way he operates, come with consequences. He said someone might have been watching me because of him. Yes, and that's the part I need you to hear clearly." Elena picked up a folder from the corner of her desk and opened it. "When you mentioned his name this morning, I made some calls to people I trust. What I learned in 3 hours is that Marco Veyron is currently in a very unstable position within his own organization. There are people who believe he is dismantling something that belongs to all of them, not just to him. These are not people who express their disagreements through legal filings. Lena looked at the folder. What are you saying? I'm saying that whatever his intentions toward you are, and I'm not impugning those intentions, his presence in your life right now may be drawing attention that is considerably more dangerous than your ex-husband. The room was very quiet. The plant by the window stood in its pot, alive and unconcerned. He told me that, Lena said. He didn't minimize it. I know. Actually, that tells me something about him. Elena closed the folder. It doesn't change the risk. What do you recommend? Elena looked at her with the expression she used when the answer was one she didn't enjoy giving. I recommend you distance yourself from Marco Veyron until the restraining order against Ethan is finalized and the counterclaim is resolved. Ethan's attorney is already using the photograph from the diner. If you continue contact with Veyron and that contact becomes part of the public record in a divorce proceeding, you will be fighting two fires simultaneously with very different kinds of fuel. Lena sat with that. She turned it over the way she turned difficult things over. Not impulsively, not dismissively, but the way her father had taught her to handle a tool you weren't sure of. Carefully, eyes open, no sudden movements. And if Marco finds out who was in that car, she said, and it turns out to be someone from his organization who's already aware of me, what then? Distance doesn't undo awareness. Elena was quiet for a moment. No, she said, Ed, it doesn't. So I'm already in it, regardless of whether I walk away. Legally, you are not. I don't mean legally. Lena looked at her. I mean actually. Elena picked up her reading glasses and held them without putting them on, which Lena had noticed she did when she was thinking something she wasn't going to say. I'm your attorney, she said finally. My job is to protect your legal position. What you do outside the law is your decision. I know. Just be careful, Lena. Be very careful about what you trust and why. It was the same thing Dr. Cole said in different language. It was the same thing Claire said. It was the same thing the last 2 years had taught her at a cost she was still paying. I will, she said. She meant it. She just wasn't sure anymore that carefulness and distance were the same thing. She didn't text Marco that evening. She went home, checked her locks, made dinner. She ate mechanically and spent 2 hours at her kitchen table making a document she hadn't made before, a timeline. Not the legal documentation log, not the incident record, something more comprehensive. Everything since the parking lot, in order, with what she knew and what she didn't know, and what she was uncertain about marked in different colors. She had been a teacher long enough to know that clarity came from making things visible. You couldn't solve a problem you couldn't see. What she could see, laid out across 3 pages of her legal pad. Ethan had been having her watched before the grocery store confrontation. He had photographs from before that night, which meant he had planned the confrontation, or at least anticipated it. He had escalated twice in 1 week after months of relative quiet. He had immediately identified Marco by name in a text message, which meant he had identified Marco quickly. Either he had access to systems that could identify someone from a photograph within days, or he had already known who Marco Veyron was. She wrote it down and stared at it. Why would Ethan Walsh, a man who ran a mid-sized commercial real estate management company in Cincinnati, already know the name Marco Veyron? She didn't have an answer. She circled the question. Then she went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about the grain of truth in a lie, and what it meant if the grain in Ethan's text wasn't Marco as dangerous, but something she hadn't identified yet. She found out on Monday. Not from Elena. Not from Marco. From a man named Stuart Finch, who called her school at 9:15 in the morning, was informed that teachers could not take personal calls during instructional time, and left a message that the office secretary relayed to Lena during her prep period with the careful neutrality of someone who had decided the message was not her business. The message said, "My name is Stuart Finch. I'm a journalist with the Cincinnati Examiner. Years. I have information that involves you. Please call me." She called him back from the empty music room at 11:15, the door closed, sitting on a chair that was 2 sizes too small because it was a chair built for 9-year-olds. Stuart Finch answered immediately, which told her he'd been waiting. His voice was the voice of a man in his 50s who had been doing this long enough to have stopped performing urgency. What he had instead was a very specific quality of patience, The patience of someone who knew that the information was going to land, regardless of how fast or slow he spoke. "Ms. Voss," he said, "thank you for calling. What's this about?" "I'll get there. Can I ask, how long have you known Marco Veyron?" "That's not a question I'm going to answer for a journalist." She kept her voice neutral. "What is it you want to tell me?" A pause. "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to understand that I'm doing it because what I've found affects you directly, and I think you should know before it's published." He said it without drama, which she appreciated. The Veyron transition, the shift toward legitimate operations that I assume you've heard about, is not voluntary. She said nothing. She waited. Marco Veyron's organization is being dismantled from the inside by federal cooperation. Two of his senior associates, men named Darren Chu and Philip Moss, entered into cooperation agreements with federal investigators 14 months ago. They have been providing information in exchange for consideration. The investigation they're cooperating with has a very wide scope. Another pause. What I have confirmed through two independent sources is that Ethan Walsh has a financial relationship with Darren Chu that predates his relationship with you. The music room was completely silent. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. "Say that again," she said. "Ethan Walsh and Darren Chu have a documented financial connection going back at least 7 years. Commercial property management contracts primarily. Legitimate on the surface. My sources tell me the relationship goes deeper than the contracts." She held the phone and tried to process the geography of what he was describing. "Ethan knows Darren Chu, who is cooperating with federal investigators against Marco." "Yes." "And Ethan showed up in that parking lot after—" She stopped. She stopped because the shape of it was becoming visible, and she needed a moment before she let herself see it completely, because seeing it completely was going to change what she understood about the last 3 weeks. "After you and Veyron were seen together," Stuart Finch said quietly. "Yes." "Ethan didn't come to that parking lot because he couldn't let me go." She said it slowly, testing the sentence as she built it. "He came because someone told him I was going to be there. I can't confirm the specifics of his movements. What I can tell you is that the timing is notable." "Someone told him I was going to be there," she said again. "And then when I left with Marco, suddenly he had photographs within days, and suddenly he texted me knowing Marco's name." She pressed her free hand flat against her knee. "He's not just an obsessed ex-husband. He's—" She couldn't finish it. "I want to be careful about what I suggest," Stuart said. "I'm a journalist. I'm not an investigator, and I'm not your attorney. What I can tell you is that you appear to be in a position where two separate and extremely serious situations have intersected around you." A pause. "Ms. Voss, do you have somewhere safe to be tonight?" "I have a restraining order against my ex-husband." "I understand. I'm asking about the other situation." She closed her eyes for a moment. She opened them. "When are you publishing?" "I was hoping to talk to you first, and possibly to Veyron, though I doubt he'll respond." "Give me 24 hours before you publish anything with my name in it." "I can do 36. 24 is enough," she paused. "Mr. Finch, how did you get my name?" The pause on his end told her the answer before he gave it. "The court filing for the restraining order is public record. Your name appears in connection with Ethan Walsh's name, and Ethan Walsh's name appears in my research." "Right." She looked at the door of the music room. Through the small window in it, she could see the hallway, empty and fluorescent lit and completely ordinary. "Thank you for calling me." "Be careful," he said. She hung up and sat in the too small chair for approximately 90 seconds, during which she identified the things she was feeling. It wasn't panic, which surprised her. It wasn't even fear quite. It was the particular feeling of a floor she thought was solid, turning out to be suspended, and the suspended floor being the entire understanding of the last 3 weeks. Ethan hadn't escalated because she'd run into Marco and Marco had helped her. Ethan had been there because someone had positioned him there. The parking lot confrontation wasn't a coincidence of geography. It was an arrangement, which meant the question she'd been asking, why is Ethan doing this now, after months of quiet, had an answer she hadn't imagined. Not because he couldn't let her go, because someone who wanted leverage over Marco Veyron needed a point of entry, and Lena Voss, photographed at a diner table across from the man, was a point of entry. She was bait. She had been made into bait without her knowledge, by people who hadn't asked whether she mattered. She walked out of the music room and down the hall and into the women's faculty restroom and stood at the sink with the cold water running over her hands and looked at herself in the mirror with an expression she didn't entirely recognize. Then she dried her hands and went back to her classroom and finished teaching the day, because 22 children were waiting for her and they had nothing to do with any of this, and they deserved her whole attention, and giving it to them was the only thing she could control right now. She called Marco at 4:17 from her car in the school parking lot before she started the engine. He answered in one ring. Lena, I had a call this morning from a journalist. His name is Stuart Finch. A silence that lasted exactly long enough to confirm he knew the name. What did he tell you? She told him everything. She kept her voice even and factual, and she did not soften any of it, because soften is what you do when you're protecting someone from a thing, and she was not in the business of protecting anyone from the truth right now. She told him about Darren Chu, about the cooperation agreements, about the financial relationship with Ethan, about the parking lot timeline. When she finished, the silence on his end went on for 6 seconds. Marco, I heard you. Is it true? About Chu? Another pause, shorter. Chu and Moss, yes. I found out about the cooperation approximately 3 months ago. She absorbed that. 3 months ago, before the parking lot. Yes. So you knew you were under internal scrutiny. You knew there were people feeding information to investigators. And you were still visible enough to be in a public parking lot being photographed with a stranger. I was buying groceries. His voice was flat, not defensive. I didn't know you existed before that night. I know that. She pressed her hand against the steering wheel. But Ethan being there, so someone positioned him, Marco. Someone who knew your movements well enough to know you'd be at that store, who had enough connection to Ethan to put him there. That's either Chu or Moss or someone working with them. Yes. He said it simply and without this quality of someone receiving surprising information. That's what I think too. You already knew this. I suspected it. I've been trying to confirm it. Something tilted in her chest. Not anger, not yet. Something that preceded anger. You suspected that Ethan Walsh being in that parking lot was connected to your situation, and you didn't tell me. I didn't know if it was connected when I came to check on you after. By the time I started suspecting, you were already... He stopped. Already what? Already involved. And I didn't want to tell you something I couldn't verify, because the telling would do damage whether it was true or not. She heard the logic of that. She also heard what it cost to hear it. That's the same reasoning someone uses when they decide for another person what they can handle. A beat. You're right. Don't agree with me to manage me. I'm not. You're right. He said it with the same quality she'd noticed in the diner. No performance, no arrangement, just the words. I should have told you earlier. I was wrong not to. She looked at the school building. A colleague walked out with her tote bag and waved from a distance, and Lena raised a hand back with the muscle memory of normal. Ethan texted me knowing your name, which means either Chu told him or Ethan already knew who you were. Finch says the financial connection goes back 7 years. It does. The words came out with a weight she felt through the phone. Ethan Walsh managed 3 commercial properties that were part of a holding structure connected to my father's original operation. He would have known the name, possibly known my father directly. He may have known me by name without having met me. So he's not just a stranger who got used as a pawn. She worked through it out loud. He has his own connection to your world. A peripheral one. He wasn't inside it. He was adjacent, a contractor who knew which questions not to ask. And now someone is using that connection to put pressure on you through me. She paused. I was in that parking lot because someone who knew both of you decided I was useful. The sentence sat between them like a piece of glass on a table, fragile and very clear. Lena, I'm not saying it to make you feel guilty. She was surprised to find that was true. I'm saying it because I need to understand what's actually happening so I can make actual decisions. Not managed ones. Not protected ones. Actual ones. What do you want to know? Everything. Starting with who Darren Chu is and how dangerous he is and what happens if Finch's article runs in 36 hours. If Finch's article runs, it becomes much harder for Chu and Moss to use you quietly, which may make you safer in the short term. A pause. And significantly more complicated in the medium term. Why more complicated? Because once your connection to me is public, Ethan's attorney has fuel for the counterclaim, and federal investigators may want to talk to you. She let that sit. Have you talked to federal investigators? No, my attorney has made it clear I'm aware of the investigation. I haven't cooperated, and I haven't obstructed. And Chu and Moss, what are they giving investigators that they need you for? Financial records, transaction history, the architecture of how money moved through legitimate businesses. He was quiet for a moment. And anything personal. Anyone connected to me who can be used for leverage or testimony. Like a woman someone made sure was photographed at a diner table with you. Yes. She closed her eyes. The parking lot was emptying around her. The November light was doing what November light did, turning everything a particular shade of gray and gold that was beautiful in the way sad things were sometimes beautiful. I need to talk to Elena, she said. Yes. And I need you to send me everything you know about Ethan's connection to Chu. Names, dates, anything verifiable. Not to use without your knowledge, but because I need to know the shape of what I'm in. A pause. That information could complicate your legal position. I know, send it anyway. Lena. His voice shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, but closer, less managed. I am sorry for what you were used for what I didn't tell you when I should have. I understand if that changes, I'll decide what it changes after I talk to Elena. She started her car. Don't make decisions for me about what I can handle. No, he said. I won't. Good. She backed out of her space. I'll call you tonight. She called Elena first, from her kitchen at 5:45. She told her everything. Elena listened the way she always listened, and when Lena finished, the silence on Elena's end had the quality of a woman reorganizing a very large amount of information very quickly. This changes the filing strategy, Elena said. I know. If Ethan has a financial connection to federal cooperating witnesses, his counterclaim is going to look very different to a judge than it looks right now. It also means he may have motivations for contact that go beyond personal obsession. He may be trying to destabilize me as a potential witness, Lena said, or discredit you in advance. Yes. Elena paused. Lena, are you all right? She was standing at her kitchen counter. Her coat was still on. She had not eaten anything since a granola bar at 10 in the morning, and she couldn't tell if she was hungry. I'm thinking clearly, she said, which wasn't quite an answer, but was what she had to offer. That's probably what matters right now. A pause. The journalist gives us 36 hours? He said 36, yes. I need to make some calls tonight. I may need to reach out to a colleague who handles federal matters. Not because you're a subject, but because I want to understand your position before investigators come to you. And they will come. I know. Don't talk to anyone official without me present. Not investigators, not law enforcement beyond what the restraining order requires. Not anyone who identifies themselves as working a federal matter. All right. And Lena. Elena's voice went slightly quieter. The documentation you've been keeping, the log, keep everything from the beginning. After she hung up, Lena stood in her kitchen for a moment, still in her coat, and then she went to her closet and took out the accordion folder where she kept hard copies of the documentation log, and the letters and the legal filings. And she sat at her kitchen table and went through it from the beginning. She was most of the way through it, somewhere around the third school incident, the one Elena had said established the pattern, when her phone buzzed. Not Marco, not Elena, not Claire. A number she'd never seen, no area code she recognized. She answered it because she had stopped being able to afford the luxury of not answering things. A voice she didn't know, male, flat, entirely without effect. Ms. Voss, you should tell your friend to stop looking into Darren Chu. The next time someone asks questions, it won't be your ex-husband standing outside your school. The call ended before she could speak. She sat at her kitchen table with her hand around the phone and her documentation spread out in front of her, and she understood, with the cold, specific clarity of someone who had just felt the actual floor fall away, that she had been afraid of Ethan Walsh for 3 weeks and had not yet understood what afraid actually meant. Because Ethan Walsh was one frightened, spiteful man, and what had just spoken into her phone was something that did not frighten easily and did not bluff and was not interested in her as a person at all. She was a variable. She was a pressure point. She was to whoever had just called A tool to be used against a man who had spent his whole life building himself into someone that tools like this worked on. She set the phone down. She looked at her documentation. She looked at the phone. And then she picked it up and called Marco back, and when he answered, she said, "Someone just threatened me by phone, and I need you to hear me clearly when I say that I am not going to disappear quietly into a safe house while this gets handled without me. Whatever you know, whatever you're planning, I'm a part of it now, and I will not be managed or protected or parked somewhere while decisions about my life get made around me." Her voice did not shake. She was almost surprised by that. "Tell me everything, all of it, starting now." The silence on his end lasted 3 seconds, and then something shifted in it, the way the quality of a silence shifts when a decision gets made inside it. And when he spoke, his voice had dropped the last of whatever distance had been in it before, the last managed quality, the careful spacing, and what was left was the voice of a man who had just stopped protecting someone from a thing and started being honest with them instead. "There's someone I need you to meet," he said. The person Marco needed her to meet was a woman named Vera Soldano, and she was waiting in the back room of a dry cleaning business on Ludlow Avenue that smelled like chemical solvent and burnt fabric and had not apparently actually cleaned anyone's clothes in some time. Marco drove. Lena sat in the passenger seat of a black car that was not the one she'd seen outside her school, and she watched the city move past the window and did not speak for 11 minutes, which was how long it took to get from her apartment building to Ludlow. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she wasn't usually aware of it. Not racing, not panicked, just present, audible, like it wanted to make sure she knew it was still there. Marco parked in an alley behind the building. He turned off the engine and looked at her. "Vera is the person who told me about Chu and Moss," he said. "She was my father's bookkeeper for 9 years. She knows where everything is." "Is she safe?" "She's been in that back room for 6 weeks." He said it without editorializing. "You tell me." Lena looked at the rear entrance of the building, a metal door, no handle on the outside, a strip of light at the bottom. "Why does she need to meet me?" "Because she has something that belongs to you." He said it in the way he said things that were complicated, plainly, without softening. "And she won't give it to me." Lena looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means go in and talk to her." He reached across and opened his door. "I'll be here." She almost said you are not coming in the form of a question, and then she didn't, because the form of a question would have made it easier for him to argue with, and she understood, from 6 weeks of watching Ethan operate, what it looked like when a man decided to let a woman go into something uncertain without him, and this did not look like that. This looked like a man who understood that there were rooms he couldn't be in. She got out. Oh. The door opened before she knocked. The woman on the other side was somewhere in her mid-60s, small, with the kind of face that had started sharp and gotten sharper, and eyes that moved to Lena's face and stayed there with the focused attention of someone reading a document they needed to get right. "You're her," Vera Soldano said. "I'm Lena Voss." "Come in." The back room had a folding table, 2 chairs, a space heater working very hard, and a stack of file boxes against the wall that looked like they'd been there longer than 6 weeks. There was a cot in the corner with a blanket on it. There was a coffee maker on a shelf that was the most lived-in thing in the room. Vera poured a cup without asking and set it in front of the chair Lena was presumably going to sit in. Then she sat across from her and folded her hands on the table and looked at Lena with the expression of someone who had been waiting to say something for longer than was comfortable. "How much has Marco told you?" Vera said. "Some, Chu and Moss, the cooperation agreement, that Ethan Walsh has a financial connection to Chu going back 7 years. 7 years, Vera repeated. The connection goes back 9. The last 2 years it moved from commercial property contracts into something different. What kind of different? Vera opened the top file box and took out a manila folder, which she set on the table but didn't open yet. Ethan Walsh spent the last 2 years helping Chu and Moss move money through property management accounts in ways that produced clean paperwork. He wasn't an architect. He didn't design the system, but he was very good at making transactions look like something they weren't. She looked at Lena directly. He did this while married to you, and he did it after. The accounts he used were, in part, in your joint names. The space heater made a small sound. Lena looked at the folder. Our joint accounts were closed in the divorce settlement, she said. Her voice was steady because she was holding it steady with both hands. Elena confirmed it. The financial disclosure. The disclosure showed what Ethan showed it. Vera opened the folder. She turned 3 pages around and pushed them across the table. These are transaction records from an account that was opened in your name 18 months ago, after the divorce. Lena looked at the pages. Her name, her social security number, partially redacted but recognizable. An account at a regional bank she had never used. I didn't open this account, she said. No, Ethan did, with your information. Vera said it without inflection, because the inflection would have been pity, and she didn't seem to be offering that. He's been using it as a pass-through. Small amounts, frequent transactions, the kind that look like ordinary personal banking. The coffee in front of Lena was steaming, and she was not going to drink it because her hands needed to stay flat on the table. For how long? 16 months. 16 months. She did the math. He started this 8 months after the divorce was final. Yes. He used my name. Yes. She looked at the pages, at her name on them, at the account number that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with her. This is what the federal investigation would find if they pulled my financial records. Yes. This is how he discredits me. She heard her own voice say it and felt the shape of it land. Not just for the restraining order, not just for the counterclaim. If federal investigators look at me in connection with Marco, they find this. They find my name on accounts connected to the same network they're investigating. That's the architecture, Vera said. Yes. Lena sat with that for a moment. The space heater clicked. Somewhere outside, a truck went past on Ludlow. Why do you have this? She said. And why won't you give it to Marco? Vera looked at her with those sharp, reading eyes. Because Marco would use it to make the problem disappear without you knowing how it disappeared. He would protect you from the details because he thinks protection means keeping people away from uncomfortable truths. She paused. His father was the same way. It's the family's central flaw. So you wanted me to know. I wanted the person whose name is on those pages to understand what was done to it. Vera pulled the folder back. And I wanted to know if you were the kind of person who could use this or the kind who would be destroyed by it. Lena looked at her. Which am I? Vera looked back. I don't know yet, but you're still sitting in that chair, so that's something. She came out of the building 20 minutes later with a copy of the financial records in a sealed envelope that Vera had produced from the second file box. And she stood in the alley in the November dark and felt the cold go through her coat like it had permission. Marco was leaning against the car. He straightened when she came out. She held up the envelope. 16 months, Marco. He's been running transactions through an account in my name for 16 months. Something moved through his face that was not the controlled stillness she was used to seeing there. I found out 3 days ago. 3 days ago. She looked at him. After you'd already been in contact with me for weeks. After Finch started making calls and I asked Vera to run everything connected to Walsh. He met her eyes without moving away from them. I was going to tell you tonight. Were you? Yes. Before or after you'd figured out how to fix it first? He didn't answer that immediately, which was the same as answering it. Marco. She said his name with both syllables, not impatiently but precisely. I am not someone you protect by withholding information from. I was that person in my marriage for 4 years and I will never be that person again. Do you understand me? Yes, he said. I understand you. Then hear this. I'm not going to disappear from this. I'm not going to let you manage me out of my own situation. There is a federal investigation. There is a man who used my identity to commit financial fraud. And there are people who have been treating me like a prop in a conflict I didn't choose to enter. She held the envelope. I am done being a prop. He looked at her in the alley with the distant sound of Ludlow Avenue behind him, and the light from the strip under the door cutting across the ground between them, and she watched something shift in his expression. Not surprise, not calculation. Something that looked, if she had to name it, like recognition. What do you want to do? He said. I want to go to Elena tonight with these records, and I want her to understand the full picture. And then I want to talk about what we do with Stuart Finch's 36-hour window. She tucked the envelope under her arm. And I want you to stop making decisions about what I can handle. All right. All right, she repeated and got in the car. Well, Elena opened her door at 8:47 in the evening, wearing reading glasses and a look that said she had been expecting a call but not a visit. She looked at Lena and Marco standing on her front step. She had a townhouse in Hyde Park with a porch light and a neighbor's dog somewhere doing its job. And she looked at the envelope and she said, "Come in." She read the financial records at her kitchen table while they sat across from her. She read them twice, the way she read everything twice. Then she took off her reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose in a slow motion that Lena had never seen from her before. "This is identity theft," Elena said. "Clean and clear. We can file criminal charges separate from the civil restraining order matter. These records, combined with the threatening letter and the escalating pattern, completely reframe the legal picture." She looked at Marco. "I need to know if these records are legitimate." "They're legitimate," he said. "And your source?" "Protected." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "I know who you are, Mr. Veyron." "I assumed." "I'm going to be direct. Your involvement in Lena's situation creates significant complications. Whatever your intentions, your presence is being used against her in the counterclaim, and potentially by people whose motivations are considerably more serious than a bitter divorce." She set her glasses on the table. "What I need to know is whether you can provide these records in a form that can be submitted to a court without creating additional exposure for my client." "I have a version of these records that came to me through an attorney-client communication," he said, "which means the chain is clean." Elena looked at him for another moment. "You've done this before. I've had attorneys." He said it without expression. "I understand how evidence needs to arrive." Something Lena couldn't entirely read passed across Elena's face. Not approval, but perhaps the recognition of competence in an unexpected place. "All right. I'm going to make a call to someone I trust in the federal building tonight. Not to turn anything over, to understand the landscape before Finch's article runs." She looked at Lena. "You need to sleep. I'm serious. Whatever happens tomorrow, you need to be functional." "I know." "Go home. Lock everything. Text me when you're inside." She looked at Marco. Wherever you're going tonight, be careful." "Always," he said. Elena looked like she doubted that, but said nothing. He drove her home at 9:40. He parked in front of her building, and neither of them got out immediately. And the silence in the car had a different quality than any of the silences before it. Not tense, not managed, but the kind that happens when two people have been through enough in a single evening that ordinary conversation feels like the wrong scale. "What happens to you tomorrow?" she said. "If Finch publishes?" "Increased scrutiny. Possible formal investigation contact. Some people in my organization making decisions I won't like." He looked at the windshield. "Nothing I haven't been preparing for." "The men who disagree with the direction, the associates?" "Yes." "Are you safe?" He looked at her then, sideways, and she could see the quality of attention he was giving the question, not dismissing it, not performing reassurance. "There are people around me I trust. I've been careful." "That's not an answer." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "Probably," is the honest answer. She looked at him. He looked tired, she thought, for the first time since she'd met him. Not weakened. There was nothing weak in the line of his jaw or the way he sat, but tired the way buildings look tired, something structural showing under the surface. "Why did you step in that night?" "In the parking lot." "Not the answer you gave me before in the diner. The real one." He looked at her for a moment. "I told you the real one." "You told me you heard what he said and couldn't keep walking. That's true, but it's not all of it." She held his gaze. "What did you hear when he said it?" The question sat in the car between them. He looked at the windshield again. "My mother," he said. "The way she used to look after my father said certain things." He didn't move his eyes from the windshield. "The expression on your face. I've seen it from close range." She absorbed that. She thought about the things it meant, and the things she didn't have the right to ask tonight. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." He said it quietly. "Go inside, text Elena." She got out. She walked to her building door and used her key and turned, and he was still there, idling, watching the entrance. She went in. She texted Elena. "Home. All locked." She made tea she didn't drink and sat at her kitchen table with the financial records spread out in front of her again, her name on pages she'd never touched before tonight. And she thought about what it meant to have your identity used by someone who was supposed to have loved you. Not stolen from a stranger, but taken from someone who had once slept in the same bed and known your middle name and your mother's birthday and the password you used for everything in the years before you learned better. She thought about Ethan's face in the parking lot, the way he'd said no one will save you with such absolute confidence, like he was reading from a document he'd written himself. She thought about the fact that the document he'd actually written was in a file box in a dry cleaning business on Ludlow Avenue, and her name was on it. She went to bed at 11. She did not sleep well. She did not expect to. Stuart Finch's article went live at 6:47 in the morning. She knew the moment it did because her phone started making sounds, beginning with Elena at 6:49 and Claire at 6:52 and her mother at 7:03, and by the time she'd responded to all three and made coffee and opened the article herself on her laptop, she had the surreal experience of reading her own name in a piece of journalism, while the coffee brewed in her upstairs neighbor's footsteps moved across the ceiling in the pattern she'd memorized over 2 years of mornings. Finch had been careful. Her name appeared twice, both times in factual context. Party to a restraining order filing, photographed in connection with the subject of the story. He had not speculated about the nature of her connection to Marco. He had not published the content of the threatening phone call, which she had told him about during a brief follow-up call at midnight. He had focused, with the precision of a man who knew where the legal lines were, on Darren Chu and Philip Moss and the federal cooperation agreement and the financial network that had run through legitimate Cincinnati businesses for 15 years. The name Ethan Walsh appeared once, in connection with commercial property management contracts connected to Darren Chu's network. No allegations, just a documented financial relationship, and the phrase could not be reached for comment. She closed the laptop and drank her coffee and looked out the window. Her phone rang. Marco. "You've seen it," he said. "Yes." "Chu's attorney filed something at 7 this morning. I don't know the content yet, but my attorney is already on it." His voice was even, but had the texture of someone who'd been awake for some time. "There are 2 cars outside my building." She set down her mug. "Whose?" "One is federal. The other I'm less certain about." "Are you safe inside?" "For now. My attorney is on the way." A pause. "Elena called me 20 minutes ago." She hadn't known that. "What did she say?" "She made contact with someone at the federal building last night. There is an active investigation, and I have been formally named in it as a person of interest. Not a subject, a person of interest. The distinction matters legally." "What does it mean practically?" "It means they want to talk to me, and that if I cooperate, the terms of that conversation are negotiable." He said it precisely and without emotion, the way you say something you've already processed at length and arrived at a position on. "It means I'm going to talk to them." She held the phone. "That's a significant decision." "It's the right one?" He was quiet for a moment. "There's also... Lena, there's something else." She waited. "Ethan Walsh was picked up this morning. Voluntary interview request from the same investigation. His attorney is Thomas Creek, who also represents Philip Moss." A pause. "Which tells you something about how long Ethan has been inside this." She stood up from the table. "He went voluntarily. At 6 this morning, before the article ran." She thought about that. About the timeline of it. About a man who had known the article was coming, which meant he'd been told, which meant someone in Finch's orbit had told him, or someone on the federal side had told him, or Chu had told him, and who had made the decision to go in first. "He's going to use the accounts," she said. "My accounts. He's going to hand them over and frame them as evidence of my involvement." "Elena thinks so too. Then I need to get to Elena now." She was already moving toward the bedroom. "I need to be in front of this before he constructs a narrative." "My attorney can..." "I don't need your attorney. I need mine." She pulled open her closet. "Marco, what you're about to do, cooperating. How much does it put you at risk from Chu and Moss's people, the ones who made the phone call?" A silence. "I'm managing that." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." Another pause, shorter. "It puts me at some risk. I'm managing it. That's all I can tell you right now." She pulled a jacket off the hanger. She thought about what managing it meant for a man with 2 cars outside his building. "Listen to me. When this is over, when all of it is over, I need you to be alive to have a conversation with me about the remaining 300 things I don't know about your life yet." The pause on his end was one beat. "That's a notable thing to say." "I know." She put on the jacket. "Stay inside until your attorney gets there." "I will. I mean it. I know you do." And his voice, for the first time in all the evenings and phone calls and difficult rooms, had something in it that was not management or precision or the careful architecture of a man controlling what he gave. Something that sounded, if she let herself hear it, like the specific relief of being told to stay safe by someone who meant it. Go. Elena's waiting. She was in Elena's car at 8:15. Elena had insisted on driving, which Lena accepted on the grounds that she was navigating 3 phone calls simultaneously and couldn't do both. When the text came from a number she recognized now as Ethan's 4th, she read it and handed the phone to Elena without saying anything, and Elena glanced at it at a red light, and her jaw went tight in the particular way it did when she was deciding between several responses and choosing none of them. The text said, "I've already told them about the accounts, Lena. I told them you set them up to help your new boyfriend. I have documentation. I have dates. I'm cooperating fully, and you should know that they believe me." She took the phone back. She read it again. She was aware of her own breathing, steady, present, deliberate. She was aware of the sound of the city outside the car window, the ordinary Friday morning of people going to ordinary things. Elena pulled into the parking garage at 4th Street. She turned off the engine. She turned to look at Lena. "He's doing what we predicted," Elena said. "He's constructing the narrative first. Can we stop it? We can counter it. We have Vera's records. We have the documentation log. We have the threatening phone call and the letter and 16 weeks of evidence of escalating harassment." Elena looked at her steadily. "We have the truth, Lena. That still counts for something." "It counts for something when someone's listening for it. Then we make sure someone is." Elena opened her door. "Come on." They were halfway to the elevator when Lena's phone rang. Not a number she recognized, area code she didn't know. She answered it. "Ms. Voss." A woman's voice, professional, precise. "My name is Special Agent Dana Reyes. I'm calling to ask if you'd be willing to come in for a voluntary conversation at your earliest convenience. We'd like to speak with you about Ethan Walsh and certain financial matters that have come to our attention this morning." She looked at Elena. Elena had heard it. She was close enough, and the voice was clear. And she put out her hand for the phone, which Lena gave her. "This is Elena Vasquez, Ms. Voss's attorney," Elena said. "She'll be happy to come in, accompanied by me. We'd like to propose this afternoon if your schedule allows. We have information I believe will be relevant to your investigation." A pause. "Including documentation of financial identity theft perpetrated against my client by the same person I suspect you've been speaking with this morning." She listened for a moment. 2 o'clock works. We'll see you then." She handed the phone back and looked at Lena. 2 o'clock. We have 4 hours. 4 hours. Lena looked at the elevator, the parking garage, the gray concrete of a Friday morning. 4 hours to build the version of the truth that could withstand being in a room with federal investigators and Ethan Walsh's carefully constructed lies. "Then let's get to work," she said. They worked. Elena's office became a war room in the way that rooms become war rooms when the people in them are operating with complete focus and nothing left to protect except the truth. Elena made calls. Lena organized the documentation log into chronological packets with labels and clear chains of reference. Elena's associate, a young woman named Dana Park, who worked with the speed of someone permanently caffeinating, pulled financial records and court filings, and cross-referenced everything against the account documentation Vera had provided. At 11:30, Elena's contact in the federal building called back with a detail that stopped the room. Elena listened. She made 2 brief responses. She hung up. She looked at Lena across the desk. "Philip Moss reversed his cooperation agreement this morning," she said. "He recanted a portion of his testimony." "Which portion?" "The portion involving Ethan Walsh." She held Lena's eyes. "He's now saying Walsh was not a knowing participant, that Walsh was a facilitator who didn't understand the nature of what he was facilitating." Lena sat back. "He's protecting Ethan. He's changing his story in a way that benefits Ethan, yes." Elena's voice was careful. "Which means either Moss has his own reasons to protect Walsh, or Walsh has something to offer Moss that's worth changing testimony for. Like handing them a cleaner target." Lena looked at the desk. "Like me." "Don't jump ahead." "I'm not jumping. I'm following the logic." She put both hands flat on the desk. "Moss protects Ethan. Ethan gives them me. The accounts, the documentation, the connection to Marco. It all points to a woman who was at the center of everything without ever knowing what anything was. That's the story they're building, Elena said. Yes. Can we take it apart? We can. But Lena, Elena paused. The 2 o'clock is going to be difficult. They're going to have Ethan's version and Moss's revised version, and 4 hours of a narrative built to make you look like the architect of something you didn't build. You're going to walk in there and you're going to have to tell your story precisely, without anger, without defensiveness, with every piece of documentation in order, and every date correct and every detail exactly right. I know. It's going to take everything you have. I know that too. She looked at Elena. I have been holding myself together under pressure for 4 years of marriage and 2 years of aftermath. I know how to do that. Elena looked at her for a moment. The same look she'd had in the parking garage. The look of someone reassessing what they were working with. Yes, she said. I believe you do. They went back to work. At 1:45, they gathered the files and went down to Elena's car. Lena checked her phone on the way down. Marco texting at 1:32. Attorney arrived. I'm going in at 4. Whatever happens at your 2 o'clock, you're ready. She typed back. I know. Then she added, be careful at 4. The response came before the elevator doors opened. You too. She put the phone in her bag. She walked out into the November afternoon, cold and bright and moving the way Fridays moved, with the particular energy of a city about to release itself into a weekend that Lena Voss was not going to spend quietly, because quiet was not what this afternoon was going to allow. The federal building was 12 minutes away. Elena drove. Lena looked out the window at the city she'd rebuilt herself in, the streets she knew now, the corners that had become hers. And she thought about a woman in a parking lot who had been told no one was coming, and she thought about everything that had happened since that moment, and she felt something settle in her chest that was not peace exactly, but was something adjacent to it, something that felt like arriving, finally, at the thing you'd been carrying for a long time and deciding, with full information and both eyes open, that you were not going to put it down but carry it forward, because forward was where it was going to mean something. The federal building came into view. She picked up her bag. She got ready to walk in and tell the truth so completely that there was no room left in the conversation for anyone else's version of it. The car stopped. Elena looked at her. Ready? Lena reached for the door handle. She opened the door and got out of the car. The federal building on Pike Street was the kind of architecture that wanted you to feel small before you went inside. All glass and gray concrete, and the particular blankness of a structure that processed human difficulty at scale and was not personally invested in any of it. Lena stood on the sidewalk for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to feel the cold on her face and decide that the cold was fine, that she had been cold before and it had not stopped her, and then she walked in. Elena was beside her, not ahead of her, not behind her, beside her, which was the right place. The lobby had security, a desk, a man in a uniform who checked their identification and made a call and wrote something on a form. Lena stood and watched the process with the particular patience of someone who had learned that institutional slowness was not the same as institutional hostility, and that impatience in lobbies had never once improved an outcome. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of a window panel, a woman in a blue jacket with her hair down and a bag over her shoulder, and an expression that was not exactly calm but was something close to it, something that had the shape of calm, because she had built it deliberately, and it was holding. They were taken to the 4th floor, a conference room with a long table and 4 chairs on each side, and a window that looked out at a parking structure. 2 agents were already there, Special Agent Dana Reyes, who looked like her voice, precise and without excess, and a man named Agent Carroll, who introduced himself and then largely listened. A third person was in the room who was not an agent. Ethan Walsh sat at the far end of the table with his attorney Thomas Creek beside him, and he looked up when Lena walked in, and for a moment she watched what happened in his face. She had become, over 4 years of marriage and 2 years of aftermath, something of an expert in Ethan's expressions, could read the architecture of them the way you read weather. What she saw when he looked at her now was not the confidence she'd expected. It was something that had the shape of confidence the way a scarecrow has the shape of a person. The scaffolding was there. The thing that filled it was not what it used to be. She sat down. Elena sat beside her. She set her bag on the floor and folded her hands on the table and looked at Agent Reyes, who looked back at her with the neutral attention of someone who had been in many rooms like this one and had long ago stopped being interested in what people looked like and was only interested in what they said. "Thank you for coming in, Ms. Voss," Agent Reyes said. "We appreciate the cooperation." "Of course," Lena said. Thomas Creek shifted in his seat. He was a man in his late 50s with the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent decades in rooms like this one and had also long ago stopped being interested in anything except the outcome. "My client has provided a comprehensive account this morning," he said. "I'm not sure what additional—" "We'll hear from Miss Voss," Agent Reyes said. Not unkindly, simply. Creek stopped. Elena placed the documentation folder on the table. "My client would like to begin with a factual timeline," she said, "and we have supporting documentation for every item on it. If the agents would find it useful, we're prepared to submit physical copies today and digital copies by end of business." "That would be useful," Agent Carroll said. It was the first thing he'd said since his introduction. Lena opened her mouth and began. She talked for 41 minutes. She did not raise her voice. She did not look at Ethan, not once, because Ethan was not the audience. The agents were the audience, and the agents needed facts in chronological order with documentation attached, and that was what she gave them. She had spent the last 4 hours organizing it, and the last 4 years living it, and the combination of those two things meant she didn't hesitate, didn't search for dates, didn't need Elena to prompt her on a single detail. She told them about the joint accounts and the financial disclosure in the divorce settlement. She told them about the account opened in her name 18 months ago, the account she had never touched, had not known existed until last night, and she slid the copies of Vera Soldano's records across the table without explaining their provenance yet, because Elena had advised her to let the agents ask. She told them about the parking lot, and the restraining order, and the threatening letter, and the phone call that had warned her, in a flat male voice she did not recognize, to tell her friend to stop looking into Darren Chu. She told them about Stuart Finch's call, about what Finch had told her about the financial connection between Ethan and Darren Chu. She told them the timeline of every contact Ethan had made with her since the divorce, documented with dates and locations and witnesses where they existed. When she stopped, the room was quiet. In the way rooms got quiet when they were full of people doing rapid internal recalibration. Agent Reyes looked at the documents. She looked at the account records. She looked at the timeline. She looked at Ethan. Ethan was looking at the table. "Mr. Walsh," Agent Reyes said, "the account documentation Ms. Voss has provided. Do you have any response to that?" Thomas Creek put his hand on Ethan's arm, the brief firm contact of an attorney managing a client's impulse, and said, "My client would like a moment." "Take your time," Agent Reyes said. Creek leaned close to Ethan. Lena watched them without appearing to watch them. Peripheral vision, the skill of a woman who had spent years monitoring a room without being seen to do it. She watched Creek's expression and saw the thing she'd been hoping to see, which was an attorney recalibrating in real time. An attorney who was looking at documents he had not previously been shown and was arriving at the assessment that his client's morning story had just developed a significant structural problem. Ethan said something to Creek she couldn't hear. Creek responded with 2 words she couldn't hear either. Ethan looked up, at the ceiling briefly, then down again, and then across the table at her. She met his eyes. She held them. She did not look away. She did not perform anything, not anger, not triumph, not the composed dignity of a woman proving a point. She just looked at him with the full, specific attention of someone who was completely done being afraid of this face. He looked away first. It was not dramatic. It was not a moment of cinematic significance. It was a man looking away from a woman he had spent years convincing she was powerless, and the smallness of it was its own kind of verdict. "Mr. Walsh," Agent Reyes said, "I'm going to ask you directly. Did you open a financial account using Lena Voss's personal information without her knowledge?" Creek said, "My client—" "Don't," Ethan said. Creek looked at him. "Don't." Ethan's voice was flat, the quiet that had always sounded controlled. It didn't sound controlled now. It sounded like something with the structural integrity removed. "I'll answer." Creek sat back with the expression of a man who had stopped being able to prevent a thing and was now only deciding how to survive the aftermath. Ethan looked at Agent Reyes. "I opened the account. She didn't know about it." The room absorbed that. "And the transactions through that account," Agent Reyes said, "the funds that moved through it, were those your direction?" "Some." "And Darren Chu's direction?" A pause. Creek made a small sound that was not quite a word. Ethan ignored it. Yes. Were you aware that Darren Chu was operating under a federal cooperation agreement during the period those transactions occurred? I was aware he was under pressure. Another pause. I didn't know the specifics of a federal agreement. But you knew the network was under scrutiny. Yes. And you continued facilitating transactions. He stopped. He looked at his hands on the table, the hands Lena had spent years reading for signs of what mood she was walking into. They looked smaller than she remembered. I thought it was almost over. I thought if I kept going for a few more months and then documented everything cleanly, I could… He stopped again. Use Ms. Voss's name as insulation, Agent Reyes said. She said it without emphasis, the way a person states a thing that doesn't require emphasis. Ethan didn't answer. The answer was in the silence. Lena looked at him across the table. She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the man who had told her no one would save her, who had said it with the certainty of someone reading from a truth he had written himself. And she understood something she hadn't fully understood before. That what he'd actually been describing all along was the only universe he could imagine. A universe in which no one came for anyone. In which everything was transaction and leverage and the management of exposure. In which the people closest to you were useful until they weren't. He had built that world so carefully he'd stopped being able to see outside it. She didn't feel sorry for him, but she understood him in a way she hadn't, and the understanding was its own kind of release. Like a knot she'd been trying to untie for years finally coming undone, not because she'd solved it, but because she'd seen what it actually was. She looked away from him and did not look back. The meeting ended at 4:22. Elena signed several forms. Lena provided contact information and was informed by Agent Reyes, with the measured courtesy of someone delivering genuinely mixed news, that the identity theft charge against Ethan Walsh would be filed separately from the federal matter and that Lena was not, and had not been, a subject of the federal investigation. She was thanked for her cooperation. She was given Agent Reyes's card. In the elevator going down, Elena stood beside her and said nothing for 3 floors, and then said, "You did that perfectly." "I did it accurately," Lena said. "I don't know about perfectly. In a room like that one, they're the same thing." They walked out into the late afternoon. The light was doing the November thing again, that low gold that Cincinnati did in the hours before dark, making the ordinary buildings look like something was being remembered. Lena stood on the sidewalk outside the federal building and took a long breath of cold air and felt it go all the way down. Her phone showed 2 texts from Marco. The first at 3:51, going in. The second at 4:18, done. Call me when you're out. She called him. He answered immediately. His voice sounded the way hers felt, scraped clean of everything that wasn't essential. "How did it go?" he said. Ethan admitted to the account. "In the room. On record." She watched a bus go past on Pike Street. "He's going to have a very bad few months." A pause. A long one. Then something moved through Marco's voice that she couldn't quite name. Not relief exactly, because relief was too simple for what this was, but something in the neighborhood of it. "Are you all right?" "I don't know yet." She watched Elena unlock her car across the lot. "I will be." She paused. "How did your 4 o'clock go?" "Long," he said. "And I think…" He stopped. She heard him exhale. "I think it went the right direction. I can't say more than that right now." "Okay." Lena. He said her name the way he had in the parking lot, that first night, with the quality of someone saying a thing because it needs to be said and not for any other reason. What he admitted to in there, in front of federal agents. "You did that." "I told the truth," she said. "I had help." "You had documentation and a good attorney. The rest was you." She looked at the sky above Pike Street, the early dark coming in at the edges, the city lights beginning their evening shift. "Marco, the thing you're going to tell me you can't say more about right now. When can you say it?" "Soon," he said. "Tonight, maybe, or tomorrow." "Soon is acceptable," she said, "but I meant what I said about being alive for the conversation." "I know you did." "Then make sure you are." She heard something in his silence that she'd heard only a few times from him. Something unguarded, something that existed in the space between what he meant to show and what showed anyway. "Go home," he said. "I'll call you tonight." She got in Elena's car. Elena drove without music and without conversation for most of the way, which was the particular courtesy of someone who understood that the period after a hard thing had its own requirements, and that filling it with words was not always the right offer. At a red light on Reading Road, she said, "The restraining order is going to be straightforward now. The criminal identity theft filing is separate but supports it. His attorney will advise him not to make any contact whatsoever." "I know. It's not over in a day. There's still the counterclaim, the federal proceedings, the criminal charge. It's months of process." "I know that too. But the weight of it has shifted." Elena looked at the road. "It shifted in that room today." Lena looked out the window. "He looked smaller," she said. Elena glanced at her. "Yes, they usually do. I thought it would feel different, bigger. It never does." Elena's voice was matter-of-fact, and also, underneath the matter-of-fact, something older. "That's the thing nobody tells you. The moment of, whatever you want to call it, resolution. It doesn't feel like the movies. It feels like putting down something heavy and finding out your arms still ache." "Yes," Lena said. "That's exactly what it feels like." Elena pulled up in front of her building. Lena sat for a moment. "Elena," she looked at her. "Thank you. Not just today. The whole 2 years." Elena looked at her steadily. "Don't thank me yet. We still have work to do." "I know." Lena picked up her bag. "But I'm thanking you now anyway." She got out. She went upstairs. She took off her jacket and her shoes, and she sat on the couch in the quiet of her apartment with her hands in her lap, and she did something she hadn't done in a very long time. She let the day be exactly what it had been, exhausting and ugly and genuinely important, without trying to process it into something smaller or more manageable. She just sat with it. Her phone lay on the cushion beside her. She didn't pick it up. Outside, Cincinnati moved through its Friday evening. The particular combination of sounds that meant people going home, people going out, the city doing what cities did, which was continue. It continued regardless of what happened inside individual rooms, regardless of what was admitted or denied, regardless of who held the truth in their hands and who tried to bury it. The city simply continued, and there was something in that, she thought, that was not indifference but was more like persistence, the persistence of ordinary life going forward. After a while, she made tea. She sat at her kitchen table. She looked at the accordion folder in the corner, her documentation, weeks of it, and then she looked away from it, because tonight it didn't need her attention. Marco called at 8:47. "Tell me," she said. He told her. The cooperation agreement he'd entered into that afternoon was not a full confession and not an immunity deal, but something in between, a structured arrangement, brokered by his attorney and the federal investigators, in which he would provide full financial records and testimony regarding the network's operations in exchange for a framework that acknowledged his active participation in dismantling it. Not immunity, not clean hands, but a path that was different from prosecution, that would require the next 18 months of his life in ways that were specific and demanding and would leave things permanently altered. "The legitimate businesses stay," he said, "under oversight, for 2 years. The rest gets unwound with full cooperation. The associates who've been opposing the direction, they have their own separate problems now. The federal investigation is moving in ways that don't require me to do anything except continue what I've been doing." And Chu and Moss? They made cooperation agreements that are now considerably less valuable given what Ethan admitted this afternoon. Their attorneys are going to have a difficult period. "Good," she said. Then, "The men who called me, the phone call. What happens to them?" A pause. "That's part of what I gave to investigators this afternoon. Names, the structure, enough that they become someone else's problem very quickly." She absorbed that. "Are you safe now?" "Safer. The people most motivated to act against me have shifted from watching me dismantle things to managing their own exposure. That changes the calculus significantly." He paused. "I'm not going to tell you it's completely clean. It's not. There's still risk. There's still—" He stopped. "I'm not going to pretend the next year is going to be uncomplicated." "I know." She turned her tea mug in a slow circle. "I'm not asking for uncomplicated. I stopped expecting uncomplicated a long time ago." "I know you did." Another pause, and then his voice shifted again into that register she'd come to recognize, the one that didn't manage. What happened in that room today? When he admitted it? What about it? Were you? He stopped, started again. How are you? It was the question he'd asked in the grocery store parking lot on that first night. The same words, the same directness. And she thought about the gap between that night and this one, the weeks between them that had contained more of the shape of her life than the previous 2 years combined. I'm okay, she said. And then, because she was done giving people the managed version, I'm tired in a way I don't quite have words for. And there's something that feels not better exactly, more like air. Like I've been in a room with very little air for a long time and someone opened a window. Yes, he said quietly. I know that feeling. Is that what today felt like for you too? In a different way. But yes. She looked at her kitchen. The ordinary surfaces of it, the counter, the cabinet, the small plant she kept by the window that was technically a succulent and was therefore supposed to be unkillable, but was nonetheless looking precarious. The completely ordinary architecture of a life she had built carefully, piece by piece, after someone had spent years taking it apart. Marco, she said, the night in the parking lot, what he said, no one will save you. I've been thinking about what that actually meant, not just to me, but what it meant that you heard it. What did it mean? It meant he was wrong about both of us, she said. He said it thinking it would prove something about me, about how alone I was. But what it actually did was find the one person in that parking lot who understood exactly what those words were designed to do. Because you'd lived in a world where people said things like that and meant them, and you recognized it. A silence, long enough that she could hear him breathe. Yes, he said, that's exactly right. He said it to destroy something, she said, and it found the wrong ears. It did, he said. She sat with that for a moment. I'm going to sleep tonight, she said, possibly for the first time in weeks in the actual sense. Good. And tomorrow I have a class of 22 7-year-olds who have absolutely no idea what I've been managing since November, and who are going to need me to be completely present for a discussion of whether Marcus's latest drawing is a rocket or a submarine, and I'm going to be there for that fully. Marcus and the submarine, Bess, he said, and she could hear the almost smile in it. The important work. The important work, she agreed. Marco. Yes. Come have dinner sometime, when things settle, when the oversight and the attorneys and the federal proceedings allow for an ordinary evening. She paused. I make decent soup. The silence that followed had warmth in it. She felt it through the phone. I would like that, he said. Good. She set down her tea. Then we have something to look forward to. Yes, he said. We do. After she hung up, she sat at her kitchen table for another few minutes, just sitting, without the documentation folder, and without her phone and without the noise of the last several weeks. Just the kitchen, and the precarious succulent, and the city outside the window. She thought about what Elena had said in the car. The moment of resolution doesn't feel like the movies. It feels like putting down something heavy and finding out your arms still ache. She thought about that for a while. Then she got up and watered the succulent, which she'd been neglecting, and checked her locks. Once, just once, no second check, and went to bed. She slept. Real sleep. The kind that comes when the body finally believes it's earned it. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, when the winter light came through the classroom windows at an angle that made everything look briefly golden, Lena's students were working on a creative writing assignment she'd given them. Write about a time you were brave. She walked the rows slowly, the way she always did, reading over shoulders, pausing here and there. Marcus had written 3 sentences about a time he jumped off the high dive, which he had apparently done at his cousin's pool in August, and which had been, in his telling, considerably more dramatic than a standard diving board. The twins Delia and Sasha had, without apparently coordinating, both written about the first day of 2nd grade, which she found unexpectedly touching. Oliver, who had opinions about everything, had written an entire page about the time he told his older brother that the movie they were watching was bad, which Oliver considered to be one of the braver acts of his young life. She paused at his desk and read the last line. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you say the true thing anyway. She stood there for a moment. Oliver looked up at her. Is it good? He asked. Oliver, she said, That last sentence is one of the best things I've read in a long time. He looked pleased with himself in the specific way of a child who suspected he was right about something and had just been confirmed. I thought it up myself. I know you did. She smiled at him and moved on. She didn't tell him why the sentence had landed. She didn't tell him about federal buildings or parking lots or the specific mechanics of what it looked like to say the true thing in a room full of people who had invested in a different version. She just carried the sentence with her for the rest of the afternoon, the way you carry something small and unexpectedly heavy. Not as a burden, but as a reminder that weight and value were sometimes the same thing. After the students left, she sat at her desk for a few minutes in the quiet of the emptied classroom. The sound of the building settling around her. A door somewhere down the hall, the radiator doing its November thing. Her phone lay on the desk and she didn't pick it up. She was not waiting for anything. That was new. Not waiting for the next hard thing, not bracing for the next contact from a number she didn't recognize. Elena had filed the criminal identity theft charge. The restraining order was in its final form, permanent now, with the full weight of documented pattern behind it. Ethan Walsh was navigating federal cooperation discussions through Thomas Creek and was not, for the foreseeable future, going to be standing outside anything that belonged to her. The federal proceedings were ongoing. They would be for some time. She had been interviewed twice more by Agent Reyes, each time with Elena beside her, each time with the specific experience of telling the truth and watching it land correctly. It was a different kind of work than she'd expected, less dramatic, more exhausting, more like building something careful than like winning something. Marco had testified in his first formal proceeding 2 weeks ago. He had not told her the details, and she had not asked for them, because there was a difference between being part of something and needing to know everything about it, and she was still learning, carefully, where her edges were. He had texted her afterward, still standing. She had texted back, "Good. The soup offer stands." He had sent back a single word that she'd read 3 times, "Soon." She sat in her classroom in the late afternoon quiet and thought about what soon meant and decided it meant what it said. Not rescue, not fairy tale, not the clean resolution that the movies promised. 2 people who had been carrying separate kinds of damage, who had found each other at the specific worst moment of both their lives, and who had made choices in that moment that turned out to matter. That was not nothing. That was in fact quite a lot. She thought about Ethan's words in the parking lot, the absolute confidence of them. No one will save you. The way he'd said it like he was describing a law of physics, something fixed and permanent and true in all conditions. She turned the sentence over in her mind the way she'd been turning it over for weeks, and she thought about what Oliver had written. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you say the true thing anyway. And she thought about all the rooms she'd been in recently, where she'd said the true thing while afraid, and about the way saying it had not felt like being saved by anyone, but had felt like something else entirely. It had felt like recognizing her own voice. It had felt like the particular, unglamorous, deeply specific work of becoming someone who could not be taken apart the same way twice. She stood up from her desk. She collected her bag and her jacket and the stack of student writing she'd take home to read properly this evening, and she turned off the classroom light and walked out into the hall. The school was mostly empty at this hour, just the hum of the heating system and a custodian somewhere with a cart. The ordinary end of an ordinary school day, which was the best kind of ordinary she knew. She pushed through the front door into the December afternoon and stopped for a moment on the steps. The cold was clean and sharp, and the sky was the particular blue that happened in Cincinnati in early winter, a blue with something almost violet at its edges, the kind of sky that made the city look briefly like a painting of itself. She stood in it for a moment. She was not waiting to be saved. She had never needed to be saved in the way Ethan had understood the word. Saved from her own life, saved from her own choices, saved from being fully herself. What she had needed was what had happened, someone to stand between her and a threat long enough for her to remember she already knew how to stand. She walked to her car. She drove home through the winter streets, and the city moved past her windows in its ordinary December way, lit up and cold and continuous. And she thought about soup, and about Marco's voice on the phone, and about the specific patience of building something real after you have learned, at cost, what unreal things look like from the inside. She parked. She went upstairs. She unlocked her door. 1 key, 1 motion, no second check. She set her bag down. She went to the window and looked at the street below. The evening coming in, the lights coming on. No one will save you, he had said. She understood now, finally and completely, what he had gotten wrong. It wasn't that someone had come. It wasn't that she'd been wrong to need help or right to need it, or that the help had been uncomplicated or clean or without its own price. None of that was the thing he'd gotten wrong. What he'd gotten wrong was the premise that she was waiting for someone to arrive, that she was standing in that parking lot expecting rescue, that her strength was contingent on whether anyone showed up. He had built his cruelty on that premise for 4 years, had arranged his entire understanding of her around the belief that she was someone who required saving in the sense of being taken from herself and placed somewhere better. What she had actually been, all along, was someone who was already doing the work, already rebuilding, already becoming. The 2 years of therapy and locked doors and careful documentation and teaching 22 children to read and calling her mother on Sundays and buying earrings she actually liked. That was not waiting. That was the work. That had always been the work. Marco stepping forward in the parking lot had not saved her. It had simply been the night the work became visible. She stood at her window for a long time, looking at the street below, the people moving through it with their ordinary December business, the city doing what it had always done. She breathed in the quiet of her apartment, the quiet she had made, that was hers. The succulent on the windowsill looked, she thought, a little better than it had last week. Small green persistence, she'd take it. Her phone buzzed. Marco. Dinner Friday. If you're free. I know a place that does soup that will make you reconsider yours. She looked at the message. She looked at the city. She thought about Friday, which was 3 days away, which was soon in the sense that mattered. She typed back, challenge accepted, 7 o'clock. She set the phone down. She went to make her own soup because tonight was not Friday, and she was hungry, and her kitchen was hers, and the act of making something warm and real in her own kitchen at the end of a hard and significant year was not a small thing. It was, in fact, everything.